Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started as the last couple of people find their food and seats so we can take advantage of the amount of time we have. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Steve Sanders. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here at the law school and a professor of law focusing on constitutional law. But as I was telling our guest, my original career goal was to be a journalist. I came here to IU to study journalism, part of that generation that was inspired to go into journalism in part because of the work being done by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward in the Watergate scandal. Growing up in Chicago in the 1970s, I had this distinct memory of my mother taking my sister and me downtown to a theater at the Art Institute to see the movie All the President's Men, the 1976 political thriller about the Watergate scandal that brought down the presidency of Richard Nixon. Like the scandal it documented, the film was built around the work of two young Washington Post reporters, played by Robert Redford and our guest today, Carl Bernstein. Their two books about Watergate, All the President's Men and The Final Days, became bestsellers. Mr. Bernstein began his journalism career at age 18 as a copy boy and became a reporter at age 16, as a copy boy, and became a reporter at age 19. Since those days of Watergate, he's had a prodigious career in writing for newspapers, magazines, offering on-air analysis and commentary for CNN, and continuing to write best-selling books, including definitive biographies of both John Paul II and Hillary Clinton. Interesting pair of subjects. Carl Bernstein is serving this year as the Indiana University Poynter Chair and the visiting Roy Howard Journalist in Residence. And so we're very grateful to our friends at the Poynter Center and at the IU Media School, and especially Professor Elaine Monahan, who will be here shortly. I think she's looking for parking, for making Mr. Bernstein available to us today. So the first thing I'd say is all the people I went to school with are very jealous right now that I get to talk to you.
That's right.
So in a New York Times poll 2 weeks before the election, 76% of Americans agreed that democracy was currently under threat. But we're told that they mean different things. What do Harris voters, Democrats, progressives mean when they say democracy is threatened? And what do Trump voters and Republicans mean when they say democracy is threatened? I don't think the 76% of people agree on one thing.
No, my guess is that that figure is an amalgam of opinions across the board, and that there probably are some diametrically opposed. Don't know this. I didn't talk to the respondents myself. I think we need to be very careful about these kinds of surveys, exit polls, et cetera, et cetera. That one of the things that we do is journalists and politicians, we don't spend enough time looking at our constituents, readers, viewers, as part of a larger culture. And I think that we need to start looking particularly at the MAGA Trump, age of Trump phenomenon in terms of who the people of this country are. And if we're going to learn more, we need to do a lot more as journalists particularly, but about how people really feel about issues, their relationships with other people in their lives. We know surprisingly little. What we do know, I think, is that we've had a cold civil war in this country for 30, 40 years, and that Donald Trump has ignited it one way or another, and that which he has created or has been created in his wake, the MAGA movement, which in turn has taken over the Republican Party, rendered the Republican Party really the most radical political party of the last century, hardly what would have been expected, I think, of the Republican Party to become a truly radical party, a huge departure from its previous incarnations, and that we need to do a lot more understanding about ourselves. And that those figures that you're talking about, democracy, 60%, 70%, I don't know they really tell us anything. They tell us that there's dissatisfaction. But in terms of anything definitive, one of the interesting aspects of this election, of the Trump phenomenon, is there are becoming some very counterintuitive alliances in terms of particular issues, in terms of points of view, and we need to learn a lot more, it seems to me.
During the run-up to the election, as much as they might have talked about Trump as a threat to democracy, it was my perception that your fellow liberal commentators and pundits rarely talked in any detail about Trump's supporters. I watch you on CNN, and there were a number of times when I thought I heard you coming close, at least closer than other people, to being critical, if not condemning, someone who would, a movement or a group of people who would vote to elect Trump, or at least you were sort of wondering, I don't know what this country is coming to if Donald Trump could be elected. Am I misinterpreting?
I wouldn't use the pejorative, I don't know what this country is coming to. What I would say is that we have now and have been experiencing a radical departure and with a leader totally unlike anything in our modern history. What's going on with these appointments? Well, of the last few days, Gates, Bobby Kennedy Jr., et cetera, Tulsi Gabbard, and more to come. Well, they're intended to destroy. They're intended to destroy, and Trump told us that's what he wanted to do. He didn't really do it in the first term, but he certainly has told us since the first term that's his intention, to destroy. What is it that he wants to destroy? The established order, not just of governance, but also cultural. And so I think we need to be looking at him keeping his promise here. And many of these appointments are intended to undermine and destroy the existing social, to some extent, cultural and political order, such as has prevailed in terms of many general principles and indications of movement, progress, however you define it, in a certain direction, going back to the New Deal. This is about undermining and destroying so many of those premises that we have come to live with, to embrace, whether you talk about aspects of the three great movements of the second part of the 20th century, civil rights, gay rights, women's rights, that there is an antipathy that this destructive aspect of now, these folks might say it's constructive, but in whatever is being constructive, the first step is to destroy so many elements. Okay, eliminate the Department of Education, if that's going to happen, might not, or the NATO alliance, the most basic security agreement we've had of the post-war era. So you can go on, but I think it's important that we take Trump at his word. If there's anything we know about him, it's that he means what he says.
One of those disruptive things has been, of course, his attacks on the media, which started in the previous term. So the Washington Post, your old newspaper, now owned by Jeff Bezos, declined to endorse anyone in this election. MSNBC's Joe Scarborough, who's been a fulsome Trump critic, made a pilgrimage, we've learned, to Mar-a-Lago in the last couple of days. Is there a worrisome trend here? Are journalists and journalistic institutions already succumbing to a sort of pre-compliance or self-censorship? Do you believe that the Washington Post decision was made because of Jeff Bezos' business interests?
I'm skeptical that, and Bob and I issued a statement immediately the afternoon that the story broke, saying that we disagreed vehemently with the decision to withdraw the editorial or not publish an editorial. I think it would have had a lot more, what Bezos did would have had a lot more credence if he had done it 6 months ago, but 2 weeks before the election, to say to the editorial staff of the newspaper, we're not going to have an endorsement editorial after it had been prepared, and I'm not going to try to get into Bezos's head in terms of his motivation. I think there are two things at play here. I think there's nothing wrong with journalists trying to establish channels of communication. Otherwise, we don't get any information. But if you've probably seen a movie of All the President's Men, our sources in Watergate were not Democrats. They were all Republicans, people who worked for Richard Nixon for the most part. We went to visit them at their houses at night and
parking garages.
And parking garages, and form these relationships based on reporting. I don't much, and if you read Bob's books, a lot of them have been based on conversations with Trump. I see nothing wrong whatsoever with that. If the purpose is of a journalist is beyond opening up lines of communication in which to get information, that's something else. And so I don't think we know yet enough about, not take aside the Bezos. I think the Bezos, one of the things that's so disturbing about what Bezos did, and it's particularly disturbing because Bezos has been wonderful about letting the Post do whatever news should be done in covering Trump. The coverage by the Washington Post of Trump has been exceptional. And and certainly the Trump people think it has been prosecutorial. So the record of the coverage is there, but what's so disturbing, as I say, is that the editorial, it is natural to expect that the editorial decision in terms of endorsing a nominee would be built in part on what the Post reported. So it seems to be also a kind of repudiation of the paper's, yes, we have a separation of church and state between the editorial pages and the news pages. But nonetheless, you would expect that there would be a parallel interest in that editorial and the work and the reportorial work of the paper.
You mentioned the Washington Post's coverage of President Trump as a bright spot. The media environment is almost unimaginably different today from the time when you were at the Washington Post. At that time, there were 3 TV networks, no internet, but more newspapers and arguably far more robust newspapers and a much different culture of journalism. Today, we get news from a staggering array of cable networks, websites, social media, legacy media are in there someplace. Which media environment was better? Would you go back to the one from the 1970s and what journalism meant in the 1970s and how it was practiced in the 1970s? Or do you think, on balance, what we have today, this fragmented multiplicity of voices, is better for us as a country?
think we need to look at events and institutions somewhat in their own time. Look, it's too easy to be nostalgic about the state of journalism in the 1970s. I would argue that an awful lot of it was formulaic. There's some really great journalism. There's still some really great journalism. We have different culture today. That's what I mean about the culture. We're all part of this larger culture. We're all part of this larger culture is social media, which drives an awful lot of the way people get their information today. I would say that the biggest difference in the media environment at the time of Watergate and now is not so much the delivery systems themselves, though there are vast differences, but rather the attitudes of readers, viewers, and consumers of information. So there's no metric that I know of that can measure this exactly, but I certainly trust my own judgment about this, and that is the vast majority of people are looking for information to reinforce what they already believe. They're already held cultural, religious, philosophical, political beliefs. That is a bigger problem to me than the delivery systems. Now, the two come together. But, we were asked early in Watergate, because we were young, we were 28 and 29, and doing this big story, and that most readers, viewers did not believe. Our colleagues in the press did not believe what we were reporting early on. And we were asked, what is it that you're doing? And we said, well, it's no name for it, but it's the best obtainable version of the truth. I would say that's something that definition has worked for the next half a century, and it's a pretty good goal. And it's a pretty good description of what happens when it's done right and regardless of the delivery system. And that doesn't mean that there can't be the best obtainable version of the truth in opinionated journals or opinionated websites. But they're also, one of the problems with social media is that anybody can be a reporter, anybody can be a publisher, and there's no curatorial standard. Old media, there was a curatorial standard, but I can remember, as you say, I went to work when I was 16 years old, a great newspaper, the Washington Star, the afternoon paper, a competitor, better paper than the Washington Post then in many, many regards. And I can remember my own dissatisfaction at the sameness of coverage that didn't go deep enough in many subjects because there was a curation of conventional wisdom, I would call it, I guess. So I think we need to look at things in their own time. I think we need to recognize there is a lot of great reporting going on today. There's reporting by nonprofits today that are somewhat stepped in, as our newspapers and traditional journalistic institutions have gone under. I think it's also important to realize that it's not just the internet and technology that has brought about the diminution of, quote, old media, that during the early stages of the internet era, the end of the century, I believe, I might be a little off on this, but that generally profits in the newspaper business were about 19%. That's after. So what had happened in that period at the end of the century wasn't just the internet coming in and swooping up, and you had chains like Gannett coming into smaller markets in America with cities of 50,000 to 500,000 people.
Like this one.
Like this one is indeed one of them. Come in, buy the local paper from local people, If there's a second paper, enter into an operating agreement with that second paper, eventually put the second paper out of business, strip what was a pretty good newspaper, and particularly helped hold a community together, which was one of the functions of newspapers in this country for a couple centuries, and strip it of its reporting, leave it as an advertising vehicle and little else. And I think that had as much to do with changing the media landscape in some ways as the internet.
You've talked about there's a lot of good journalism being done. You also mentioned, though, that maybe we're not doing enough to understand the people, the larger culture that is driving our politics today. What media are doing an especially good job? For potential lawyers, if we can, I don't know if it's possible to separate out issues of law and democracy from the rest of political coverage, but what are the best media outlets? What media outlets are doing the best work today that you see?
I'm not sure that I read and watch enough of them to really know. I can tell you that look, we have a different landscape. We have new forms, podcasts for one. Well, there's a lot of really good information. One thing is we have a smorgasbord of choices of how we can get news and information that has far more latitude than at the time of Watergate. At the time I went to work at the Star in 1960. We have podcasts. We have Sirius FM channels. We have infinite variations on the web. We have streaming. So I think it's hard to single out news organizations. I think also importantly, we still have a few legacy news organizations that in terms of delivering real news in the way that we have traditionally defined it, I think you still have certainly the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal in a kind of league by themselves, the Washington Post aspiring to be, gone through some troubles of late in terms of its report, I think. Times has had some problems of its own identity, how it covers things. The Journal, look, nothing's going to be perfect, but you take those three right there, and there's an awful lot of terrific reporting. Networks having a very different function than they once had. So we have this landscape in which we're bombarded by more information and constantly than we've ever been.
Some might say it's a mile wide but an inch deep. Is that a fair criticism?
I don't think so. I think if you look, there's some real depth, and that includes depth in politically, culturally committed sphere of information. You can do a great investigative story, and it might be in a right-wing publication, or in a left-wing publication. The question is about the truth of the piece and the information itself. So that I think it's a mistake to discount in total the political orientation of a source of news, but we should know what the hell it is and where it's coming from. But that does not preclude its doing relative work relative to the best obtainable version of the truth. Its interest might coincide with its political interests, might coincide with what its findings are in terms of the best obtainable version of the truth. The other thing is, I think as I said at the beginning, I think there are some shifting political, particularly the Never Trump, anti-Trump movement. You take a look at the group of people that used to be called neocons, which are becoming a huge force in a lot of podcasts, a lot of Substack, individuals, organizations. So one of the things that I'm going to call it the age of Trump, because I think that's really what we now have experienced and are experiencing, and particularly the fact that there are these points of view with, quote, odd bedfellows, or however you want to put it, that are emerging, even down to Liz Cheney and her role in this campaign.
So we've talked about the supply side, the distribution system of news, as you put it. Another poll, only 31% of Americans say they have a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in the media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. Is that just an inevitable result of political polarization? Is there anything that media can do to persuade some of those people not to have the kind of doubt, skepticism that they do?
I'm skeptical of those kinds of numbers. I think if you would have looked during the Nixon presidency, up until the so-called Saturday Night Massacre, my guess is, I don't know what the figure is. Look, the Nixon White House tried to make our conduct the issue in Watergate, not the conduct of the president and his men. The Washington Post, Woodward, Bernstein, Ben Bradley, Katharine Graham, and it worked. It worked quite well for a good while. I'm just guessing. My guess is you can find a good number of years where that 31% existed in the past. I think it's the media is an easy target. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, and compare it to trust in other institutions. I don't know. And also, suppose it were 85%. What is it we would be doing that would generate an 85% approval rating? It might be real crap. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Yeah. You wrote a piece in 1992 for the New Republic called "The Idiot Culture," in which you talked about the turn of journalism toward frivolousness. But I mean, in some ways, 1992. I don't know. I was about to say it looks good compared to what we have today, but my sense is you would disagree with that.
What that piece was about, The Triumph of Idiot Culture, was a piece I wrote for a cover story for the New Republic magazine. And it really was an examination of Murdoch culture that was new at the time, through primarily the New York Post, tabloid, manufactured controversy, celebrity culture, and gossip and sensationalism. And interestingly enough, the illustration in the first paragraph was about Donald Trump. And the lead of the piece was Diane Sawyer, a quote from Diane, saying, "Marla, was it really the best sex you ever had?" And to illustrate where one of the great broadcasts, 2020, on ABC News, was going. Yeah. And the piece went on from there. I think, now we have whole institutions devoted to TMZ, wherever you want to go. I mean, again, the press, media, tends to be reflective of the larger culture. In this instance, Murdoch took the larger culture somewhere where it hadn't been in this country today. That you did not see the kind of stuff you saw in the New York Post. What was his broadcast? I can't remember the name of it.
Current Affairs?
Steve, no, it was Steve, anyway, it doesn't matter. A gossipy television show.
We've got an audience of prospective lawyers here, in some cases lawyers. So let me ask you a little bit about the charges, the trials that didn't take place against President Trump. You said earlier that, well, there were a lot of people who didn't believe our reporting about Watergate, but after President Nixon resigned, they believed it. At least I think the vast majority of them did. Isn't it the case today that even if Donald Trump had been convicted, he was convicted, although that case was arguably a bit frivolous, even if he were convicted in the Jack Smith case, in the Georgia case, there are tons of people in this country that just would say they don't believe it. They don't believe he did it. It was rigged. Biden made them, convict him and so forth. Isn't that different than it was at the time?
Well, I think we got about 4 questions at once.
Yeah. It's about whether people trust the media's reporting after they have revealed objective facts.
Well, first of all, it's not just the media's reporting. You had the 2 greatest modern congressional investigations, certainly of the modern era. The Watergate investigation and the January 6th investigation. Some ways, as great as the Watergate and Senate Watergate Committee investigation was, the January 6th investigation is even more remarkable in the rapid time frame in which it developed the information. The information developed in the January 6th investigation is overwhelming. It's a great indictment. I don't know how many people here have read the original indictment. You'll see immediately there's a tremendous amount of information. You can see that the case is both circumstantial and witnesses, both in profusion. The facts are very clear, as is the law. And all those elements come together in really a great legal case. So what happened? Well, the first thing that happened is that we've now had I don't know if you have to go back to Dred Scott to find as terrible a decision as you do in the Supreme Court decision on executive privilege. But even with this circumscribed, horrible definition of executive privilege, which allows the president to do damn near anything under the rubric of official acts, something horrible happened in the Supreme Court not deciding that case until the end of the term. That case could have been taken early in the term, could have been decided the same way. If they wanted that to be, the justices wanted that to be the opinion, okay, there should have been a trial. Because one of the salient, or not so salient, facts of what we have, the American people should have been able to cast their votes knowing what happened through the judicial system. The judicial system failed utterly. Compare that to the Nixon presidency in the United States versus Nixon, in which there was demand by the special prosecutor for the president's tape recordings. It was widely expected that the Supreme Court, through the Chief Justice of the United States, Warren Burger, who had been appointed by Richard Nixon, would decide in Nixon's favor, that Burger would organize the court to go into the bag for Nixon.
So you believed there was a possibility that would happen when you were observing this on his way to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think I had no idea what would happen, but certainly there were those who had that expectation, and the law was less than clear. Burger wanted there to be a unanimous decision, and that unanimous decision had to be that Nixon must turn over the tapes because no one in this country was above the law, including the President of the United States. So you compare that to what happened in this case, but I think we also need to look at how Republicans were really, in many regards, the heroes of Watergate. That both on the Senate Watergate Committee, there was a real bipartisan effort on behalf of some of the Republican senators to get the facts and pursue the investigation. And just as important, if not more so, when the articles of impeachment were voted by the House Judiciary Committee, there were votes from Republicans, particularly Southern Republicans, for the articles of impeachment. And then Nixon, knowing that he was going to be impeached by the full House, but expecting that he had a real shot at being acquitted by the Senate in a Senate trial, a delegation of Republican senators and congressional leadership on August 7th, 1974, went to the White House to see Nixon. And they had agreed that Barry Goldwater, the great conservative, 64 nominee of his party to be President of the United States, the candidate of the Republicans to be President of the United States, was made to be their spokesman. And they went into the Oval Office across from Nixon behind the desk. And after some pleasantries, Nixon said, "Barry, tell me, how many votes do I have in the Senate for acquittal?" You need 2/3, as we know, most recently from the Trump 2 impeachments and Senate trials, to be convicted. And Nixon said, "How many votes do you think I have, Barry?" Goldwater said, "Well, Mr. President, right now you might have 4 or 5 votes, and you're not going to have mine." That was it. The next day, Nixon announced his resignation. So compare that to what happened in the Trump, and one of the things that the craven attitude of Republican members of the House and Senate toward Trump throughout this age of Trump has been extraordinary.
Do you think
let me just say this. So you look, I finally did a story for CNN, I think it was the 3rd year of the Trump presidency, naming 21 Republican senators who privately hold or held Trump in utter contempt, disdain, but just go out in a craven way and support him and refuse to say what they really believe. I was able to do the story without abrogating any confidentiality with senators because I also had the information from people on their staffs. And there was one denial of the 21 that I named, and that senator was lying. And, and I got a call the next day from a retired Republican senator who had recently left the Congress, and he said, "Carl, the real number is closer to 40." And if you look even now at what's going on in the Senate with some of these nominees, you see now they're a lot more admiring of Trump now, genuinely, than they were, given his accomplishment. And make no mistake, it's a hell of an accomplishment, what he's achieved. I urge everybody here to read Bob's book, his latest book. It begins, there's a prologue, and it is based on a tape-recorded interview that Bob and I did with Trump in 1989. And in what you see from this taped interview that we did, I'll tell you the circumstances in a minute, is that Trump is the same person today as he was in 1989. And the quotes from Trump in this interview with us are really extraordinary. And what happened was that I happened to be at a dinner party in New York, and Trump was there, and I was talking to him, and Woodward was in town and staying with me, and but he wasn't at the dinner, and he came up to the dinner after dessert, and Trump took a look at the two of us together and said, "Wow, wouldn't it be something if Woodward and Bernstein interviewed Donald Trump?" So we said, "Sure, how about tomorrow?" And we did, and then about 3 years ago, I said to Bob, I said, I can't find a transcript of the damn thing, and I don't have the tape. Do you have the tape? He looked, couldn't find it, and he's one of the greatest pack rats in history, and couldn't find a transcript. And then about 3 months ago or 4 months ago, his assistant was mucking around in one of the storage bins that is maintained, and there was this envelope, and inside it was the tape. And so the prologue has, and you hear Trump talking about how, depending on, one, he talks about his instincts, how he does everything instinctively, and he does. And those instincts, think how acute those instincts have been about an understanding of aspects of our culture and our politics throughout the age of Trump. He has been urged to do it another way, and he's done it his own way, and it's worked in terms of his objectives. And what you see in this interview is he talks about, well, okay, if I need to really be a killer with somebody, easy enough. If I need to give him candy, I give him candy. And that really, to some extent, sums a lot of it up. And then, of course, he lied his way through the whole interview on all kinds of things, bashing the Japanese for buying up Manhattan real estate at the time. And we knew that Trump be broke if it weren't for the loans that he had from the Japanese.
So
anyway,
you think he hasn't changed since then? Despite what people say, he seems more, there's speculation about his mental state, that he seems more shrill.
I think questions of sociopathy, which are legitimate questions. I'm no doctor. I'm not going to weigh in with a medical diagnosis. But the basic behavior, the basic concerns, Trump's public persona and objectives are about Donald Trump, not about the country, not about making the country a better place, helping the people of the country. It's about him. Can we ask
I was
folks
just about
out
to say,
here
we've got some time, so I'd like to, we don't have a microphone. This is being recorded, so if you want to ask
get
a
up and
question, and then
shout.
I will try to repeat it so that the people in the recording can hear it. Yeah. The question is, does the Joe Scarborough going down to Mar-a-Lago and making peace with Trump apparently undermine the credibility of the media from both a sort of conservative and from a liberal perspective?
I think we need to know a little more. I certainly don't have any doubt that what Joe and Mika have said on the air, they believe. And as I said, I think there's arguments you can make for opening channels of communication. But if the purpose of opening those channels is not really in service to better reporting, and rather is in service to access for the sake of access or building ratings, or I'm oversimplifying it, that's another story. I think we'll have to see a little more.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was. Absolutely, and I've said it quite vociferously. Well, I think there's a tradition in journalism that one of the functions of all kinds of publications and news organizations is to express the opinions of the ownership and leadership of the paper. Some papers do not do it, have not done it traditionally. The Washington Post did not for a good length of its history. Then starting in, I think, 1970, it went back to doing, I can't remember. No, and nor, I think that what was so disturbing about the decision of the Post is that the editors of the paper had already made the decision that they were going to endorse a candidate, and that was Harris. And that this decision by Bezos was made 10 days before the election. They want to do it 6 months before, so that it certainly conveyed a nefarious implication. And so, and again, I also think that there's something sui generis about Trump and his actions and what he stands for. I think it's a much easier call to endorse Trump's opponent based on his actions than most other opponents. This was not a conventional election with conventional choices and implications.
Yeah.
Mr. Bernstein, first of all, it's an honor to have you here. And then in your article, The Idiot Culture, you said that the media largely missed why people were attracted to Ronald Reagan. And then today you said that the media has missed why people are attracted to Donald Trump. So what
Did I say the media had missed Trump's appeal?
I think you said maybe explaining how the movement toward Trump generated the people, the culture that voted for Trump.
I think that there is something extraordinary about 80–90% of the people in this country who identify themselves as Republicans, and given the history of the Republican Party, identifying with Donald Trump and his persona and his positions on various issues. But did we do a terrible job of it all along? I think I'm not sure that they're quite as comparable as the question, but there certainly are some similarities. That Ronald Reagan, his intelligence was questioned by a lot of people, including sotto voce in the press and some not so sotto voce. Same with Trump, who I would say has a certain kind of intelligence. So I wouldn't, I think yes. But look, by the time he was elected once, and by the time he damn near was elected a second time, we should have had a pretty good idea that he might be able to win. And it's not just a question of whether Trump was in a position to win. It's what's extraordinary is the nature of the man and what he's advocated and what he has said, and the willingness of such huge numbers of people in this country, particularly given the authoritarian nature of his right out there objectives, have been put forth.
Gentleman in the green back there.
What story? Trump's? Oh, Watergate. I wouldn't call Project Veritas journalism. I'd call it, snatch and run. I don't know. But it's a form of entrapment in which a desired embarrassment of someone or a group is the intent. It doesn't mean that Project Veritas can't get some truthful things out there. It can. Anybody can. But it's not a form that I would recognize as a legitimate form of journalism. It's rather an exposure process entity.
You see if there are questions on this side of the room. Yes.
How unprecedented, in your opinion, are our times in respect to that's all women's rights, healthcare, immigration?
Well, again, I think you got to get back to living in the time we exist in. If you go back, we've had a restrictive immigration policies through most or a lot of our histories. We had quotas, and particularly quotas that excluded all but Caucasians, among others, through the 20th century. A lot of restrictions. The issues involved in today's immigration debate, what's going on, seem to me to be quite specific to our time, to our demographics as they exist, to an out-of-control system, which I think there's some consensus about that, and how do you bring a system of immigration under control, particularly given how many people have come into the country illegally over the years. And we are going through a period in our history where the things that you have specified, or I did earlier, I talked about the women's movement, the gay rights movement, and civil rights movement, are being chipped away at by large numbers of people in this country. So I think it has to be looked at in terms of, well, what is this? It goes beyond just the immediate issue of why is it that, I mean, I would make the argument that affirmative action has been one of the great successes. The creation of a huge black middle class in this country from one that really didn't exist except in very small numbers. One of the great achievements of our age, and civil rights generally, that didn't come about until the 1960s and even the 1970s. And so now we find there's a backlash, there's a movement against that we've gone too far, whatever. And in other areas. And I'm rambling. This is when my wife says, that's it.
Well, can we do, we're almost out of time, but we have the privilege in this law school of having a federal circuit judge having his chambers in our building, and he's here in the audience. So I want to, Judge Hamilton had his hand up, I saw earlier.
Your Honor.
Serious concerns about President Nixon going outside constitutional bounds, declaring emergencies and so on.
You mean with the anti-war movement demonstrators? Or?
But in particular, his position was threatened by the Watergate investigation.
Oh, okay, right.
And the court decisions. I wonder if you could compare and contrast the available constitutional guardrails then and now.
Well, I don't know if you were here when I talked about the United States v. Nixon, because what I said was that Nixon had the expectation that the Chief Justice of the United States, whom he had appointed, Warren Burger, would somehow organize the court to support the president's ability under some form of executive privilege to hold on to his tapes. And of course, Burger organized the court and said we have to have a unanimous decision that Nixon needs to turn over the tapes and that nobody is above the law. And that we have just the opposite interpretation in the executive privilege decision of the Supreme Court a few weeks ago. But even more horrible than that, it seems to me, was the court's inability to decide the case early on to allow a trial to happen, even under that circumscribed definition of executive privilege. I think people in this country deserve to have seen the president on trial, and it should have figured in that we do have a system of checks and balances, and it was abrogated in this case for nefarious reasons. I think that, interestingly enough, Trump had seemed to piss off the justices of the court in a number of earlier decisions. I think there's a lot to be learned about this last decision and how it came to be. That the court did not do him a lot of favors going in through his presidency on his extreme actions. They refused to take a lot of cases. And then came this decision, which to me is very mysterious. And I hope that it's the subject of a lot of great reporting. I ask you the question. One, would you have tried to expedite the case? And two, would you? And secondly, is there both precedent and a really great judicial argument to be made for circumscribing from giving such wide swath of privilege? Thank you for being here.
So one of the one of the great things about being at this law school and being on this campus, that's, we're enmeshed in a larger campus that is doing vibrant things and has a great media school, and one of the results is that you get to see one of the great history makers as well as journalists and commentators of our time. So thank you to Carl Bernstein, thank you to Elaine Monahan from the media school for helping make this possible, and to everyone at the law school who supported it. And thank you for coming.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.